The sound of the adhan echoed softly through the quiet neighborhood as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the sky. Ian sat on the worn prayer mat in his small apartment, staring at the single date and glass of water in front of him. The room smelled faintly of warm lentils and roasted cumin from the kitchen downstairs, but he made no move to stand. He was lost in thought, feeling more burdened than blessed. This was supposed to be the holiest month of the year, the time when hearts soften, when prayers soar and forgiveness rains down. Yet for Ian, it felt like another round of exhaustion, juggling his warehouse job, his mother's medications, the late nights, the early mornings, and the constant guilt that he was doing it all wrong. He finally reached for the date and whispered Bismillah before taking a bite. The sweetness filled his mouth, but not his heart. As he sipped the water, he heard his neighbor's children laughing through the wall, and a strange ache settled inside him. He wanted that joy, that lightness, that sense of peace Ramadan promised in every khutbah and every YouTube reminder he watched later that night after praying Taraweeh alone. Ian scrolled through his phone, hoping for distraction. Instead, he stumbled upon a short clip. A scholar was speaking softly yet powerfully, saying, "If Ramadan feels hard, you are not failing, you are transforming." Ian paused his scrolling, sat upright, and listened. Those who struggle in Ramadan, those who cry through it, are not the weak. They are the ones being polished like a diamond under pressure. Something in those words cracked the hard shell around his heart. He replayed the video twice, 3 times, then opened a notebook and wrote down the words. He closed his eyes and whispered a dua quietly, a little more desperately than usual. The next morning, Ian rose before dawn to prepare suhoor. His body felt tired, but something had shifted. He no longer saw it as a chore, but as a gift, a moment to nourish himself before a day of patience. Before eating, he opened the Quran for the first time in weeks and began reciting softly just a few verses, but they soothed something deep inside him. Later that day, while stacking boxes in the warehouse, his co-worker Hassan nudged him. "Hey man, you're fasting too, right?" Ian nodded. "You look better today," Hassan said. "Did something good happen?" Ian thought for a moment, then smiled. "Honestly, I think I just started seeing things differently." That night, he broke his fast with a simple meal, but his heart felt full. He prayed Taraweeh again, but this time with intention, with presence, not perfection. Days passed and Ian found himself looking forward to the pre-dawn quiet, the stillness of suhoor, the whisper of fajr, the coolness of wudu. The struggle remained, but it began to feel like a struggle with meaning. One afternoon after work, Ian stopped by a small masjid he hadn't visited before. As he stepped inside, the smell of musk and old carpets greeted him. The imam was speaking to a few people in the corner about something called micro-blessings. In Ramadan, we look for miracles, the imam said, but miss the mercy in small things. The door that opened before we knocked, the friend who checked on us, the forgiveness we received. Without asking, Ian stayed longer than he intended, listening, quietly letting those words soak into his tired soul. He went home that evening and thought about the micro-blessings in his own life. The landlady who allowed him a few extra days on rent, the pharmacist who quietly gave him a discount on his mother's meds, the friend who texted him a dua just when he needed it most. That night during sujud, Ian cried not from pain but from recognition. For the first time he saw that the blessings weren't missing, they were hidden behind his expectations. Ramadan wasn't about soaring spirituality. It was about softening under pressure. It was about resilience in the routine, about discovering beauty in difficulty. The next day was Friday, and Ian wore his cleanest clothes and went early to Jummah prayer. The khutbah was about intentions, about how renewing your niyyah, even halfway through Ramadan, could bring immense reward. It's not about how perfectly you fasted the first half, but how sincerely you return in the second. The imam's voice rang through the mosque like a reminder sent directly to Ian's heart. After the prayer, an elderly man sat beside Ian and smiled warmly. "First Ramadan?" Ian shook his head. "No, but maybe the first one. I'm starting to understand." The man nodded and said, "Then you've already received one of its Greatest blessings, clarity of heart, that only comes when you stop chasing the perfect Ramadan and start embracing the real one. They talked for a while. Ayan learned his name was Baba Kareem, and he had been fasting for over 50 years. Each Ramadan brought new lessons, new mercy, new growth. Not every year was easy, but every year brought something valuable if the heart stayed open. That weekend, Ayan did something he had put off for a long time. He called his estranged sister. They had not spoken since their father's death 2 years ago. The call was awkward at first, filled with silence and hesitation, but he found himself saying, "I don't want another Ramadan to pass with this between us." She broke down crying, and they talked for hours, healing wounds they both pretended didn't exist. That night Ayan felt something lift from his shoulders, a heaviness he hadn't realized he was carrying. As the last 10 nights approached, Ayan took a few days off work. He didn't go for Umrah or retreat to a mountain to worship. Instead, he stayed home helping his mother cleaning the masjid, volunteering for iftar service. He prayed more, he forgave more. One night during Qiyam, he stood in a small circle with others listening to the Imam recite Surah Al-Qadr. Tears slipped down his face as the meaning unfolded. The night of power is better than 1,000 months. A gift hidden within a month of striving, and suddenly it all made sense. Ramadan wasn't about how grand your deeds were, it was about the sincerity behind them. It was about returning to Allah with the version of yourself that tried, failed, repented, and still showed up by the time Eid arrived. Ayan felt something new, not perfection but peace, not pride but gratitude. He had discovered the hidden blessings of Ramadan, not in the dramatic moments but in the quiet, ordinary acts that changed everything. He walked to Eid prayer with a heart lighter than he could remember, and a smile that felt real this time. He didn't just survive Ramadan, he was transformed by it, and deep inside he knew the reward wasn't just waiting at the end. The reward was becoming who he was always meant to be. Morning of Eid had passed, but Ayan's soul was still floating in the silence left behind by Ramadan. His apartment felt oddly quiet, the kind of quiet that arrives after a guest leaves, a quiet filled with reflection and longing. He sat near the window, sipping tea, watching the neighborhood children play with balloons and new clothes, and he realized something he did not feel: the same emptiness as last year. Instead of rushing back to old habits, Ayan found himself clinging to the peaceful rhythm Ramadan had gifted him. The early mornings felt sacred now. The Quran on his shelf no longer gathered dust, and his connection with his sister had grown stronger since their phone call a few days ago. She had even come over with their mother, and they shared suhoor together in the final nights. But as life slowly returned to its normal tempo, Ayan began to feel the weight of choice pressing down on him. Would he let go of what Ramadan gave him, or would he carry it forward? Was it even possible to hold on to the blessings now that the month had ended? One afternoon, Ayan visited Baba Kareem again, who invited him for tea and dates in his simple home. There were no grand decorations, no loud voices, just a humble room filled with books and the scent of old wood. They sat on the floor cross-legged as Baba poured tea and said quietly, "Ramadan is not a visitor who leaves when the moon changes. It is a teacher whose lessons continue long after." Ayan listened closely as Baba Kareem shared a story about his first Ramadan during a war-torn year in his village. There was no food, no electricity, no clean water, but still they fasted, not because they were strong, but because they believed the fast would strengthen them. What we learned then was that ease is not in comfort, ease is in closeness too. That sentence stayed with Ayan for days, the idea that ease comes not from having less to carry, but from having a stronger back, from leaning more into Allah, made him reevaluate how he looked at his struggles back. At work he noticed something different about himself. He no longer snapped at delays or grew frustrated with rude customers. Instead, he responded with calm, even when things went wrong. His co-workers began noticing, and one even joked, "Hey Ayan, you become a Sufi or something." He laughed and simply replied, "I just learned to breathe differently now." One evening, his supervisor called him into the office. Ayan assumed it was for a schedule change or extra shift. Instead, the man said, You've been here over 2 years, always on time, hard-working, and this last month we've seen something more in you. We want to promote you to shift lead. Ayan sat stunned for a moment, his heart thumping. This wasn't something he had expected, and yet he remembered Baba Kareem's words, sometimes blessings come disguised as responsibilities. He accepted the role with humility and went home with a heart full of gratitude. His mother hugged him when he shared the news and said softly, "Your father would have been proud." She rarely spoke of his father, and those words struck deep. Ayan sat with her late into the night, listening to her stories about the man he barely remembered, a man who had fasted every Ramadan with conviction despite long days of labor and aching joints. Inspired by those stories, Ayan began writing down reflections from each day. He started a small blog, not to become famous, but to document the changes he was witnessing in his own heart. He called it Hidden Mercy and shared short thoughts each evening. One post read, "I used to wait for Ramadan to fix me. Now I let it reveal me." To his surprise, people began reading. He received emails from strangers saying his words gave them hope. One woman wrote that her depression had made her fear Ramadan, but after reading his entries, she felt encouraged to try again next year. Another young man shared that he had always felt unworthy of Ramadan until he saw someone else struggle and still be blessed. Blog became more than just a journal. It became a way of keeping Ramadan alive throughout the year, not with grand declarations, but with soft, steady reminders. One day, while walking home, Ayan saw a young boy sitting alone on the mosque steps crying. His clothes were dusty and his face smudged with dirt. Ayan knelt beside him and asked gently, "What's wrong?" The boy sniffled and said, "My dad is gone and I wanted to go to madrasa, but they sent me away because I didn't bring my notebook." Ayan felt something break inside him. He offered the boy his hand and said, "Come with me." They went to a nearby store where Ayan bought him a notebook, some pencils, and a small bag. Then he walked him back to the madrasa and spoke with the teacher. Explaining the situation, the teacher nodded and allowed the boy to join the class again. As the child turned to wave at Ayan before disappearing into the room, Ayan felt a warmth in his chest deeper than anything he had felt in years. Walked home that evening reflecting on how little it took to become the answer to someone else's dua. Maybe that too was a hidden blessing of Ramadan, the ability to give even after the month had ended. As the weeks passed, Ayan kept up his prayers, though not always perfectly. He kept reading Quran, even if just a few verses each night. He continued to check on his sister and started volunteering on weekends at a local food drive. But not every day was easy. There were days he woke up late, missed Fajr, felt spiritually empty. There were days when doubt crept in and whispered that he was only good during Ramadan, and now he was just pretending on. One such evening, he went back to the same masjid and found Baba Kareem sitting near the window, gazing at the sky. When Ayan sat beside him and shared his struggles, the old man placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "Young man, even the moon waxes and wanes, and yet it never fails to return to fullness. Do not judge your faith by its low tide. Trust that it will rise again." That night, Ayan sat in his room, lit a candle, and opened the Quran again. As he read, he wept, not out of fear, but out of longing. Longing to keep the connection alive, longing to walk in the light, even when the moon was hidden. Next morning, he woke before dawn, not because he had to fast, but because his heart wanted to speak to its creator. He stood on the prayer mat, wrapped in the quiet of dawn, and whispered a prayer. "O Allah, let what I learned in Ramadan stay in my veins like breath. Let the ease I found in you guide me through hardship. Let the mercy you poured on me become mercy I pour onto others." Ayan realized then that the true blessing of Ramadan was not in the fast alone, but in how it taught him to slow down, to notice, to surrender, to serve, and to love deeper than he ever had before. And as the sun rose, he smiled softly, knowing that the season may have ended, but the sky was painted in warm orange as Ayan stepped out of the masjid after Maghrib prayer and walked slowly through the familiar streets of his neighborhood. People were rushing home, families gathering for dinner, children playing with kites, and laughter echoing in the air. Life had moved on from Ramadan, but inside Ayan, something still lingered, a sacred thread tying him to those blessed days when the world had felt slower, clearer, lighter. Since Ramadan ended, Ayan had begun noticing how easy it was to slip back into old habits. His phone buzzed more often, his scrolls lasted longer, his patience wore thinner at times. Yet each time he found himself drifting, he also found a way back through a verse, a dua, or simply a deep breath, and the memory of how Ramad had trained his heart one night after a long shift. Ayan sat on his balcony, staring up at the stars. He remembered Baba Kareem's words, "Ease is not found in the absence of hardship, but in the presence of meaning." That sentence had become like a compass guiding him when he felt lost. That same night, Ayan opened his blog and wrote a post titled "When the Fire Cools." He wrote about how faith after Ramadan was like maintaining a fire in the cold. You had to keep feeding it with remembrance, with gratitude, with service, even when it felt small or flickering. Posts spread quickly. It was shared on Islamic forums across countries, and soon his inbox filled with messages from people thanking him for reminding them they were not alone. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Nuseba, a revert who had observed her very first Ramadan in silence, without family or community support. She wrote, "I kept thinking I was doing it wrong because I didn't feel the way others described it, but your words made me realize that struggling is not failure, it is faith in motion." I needed that reminder, Ryan replied with warmth and encouragement. They exchanged a few messages over the next week, talking about their different journeys, but shared reflections. It amazed him how the same fast that humbled a lifelong Muslim could uplift someone new to Islam. It made him realize that the mercy of Ramadan was not limited by experience or background. Ian decided to host a small community gathering at the masjid for people who felt disconnected after Ramadan. He reached out to Baba Kareem, who loved the idea, and offered to speak about the year-round blessings of Ramadan. They named the event "The Season Never Ends" and designed flyers, which Ayan printed and handed out after Jummah prayer. The gathering took place on a cool Saturday evening with modest food and a circle of chairs under warm lights strung across the masjid courtyard. Ayan watched nervously as people slowly filled the space. Some were young students, some elderly women, a few reverts, and even a couple of non-Muslims who were curious about Ramadan's impact. Baba Kareem opened the night with a story about how his mother used to whisper duas into pots of food during Ramadan, not just for flavor, but because she believed blessings could soak into every bite. Her fasts were not perfect, but they were full of intention. He spoke about the danger of tying spirituality only to Ramadan because it made us forget that Allah was not seasonal. His door of mercy remained open throughout the year. Ayan then stood and shared his story, his doubts, his struggles, and how small changes had reshaped his heart. By the end of the evening, people were crying, smiling, hugging, sharing stories. One elderly woman confessed that she had fasted every Ramadan for 30 years, but had never felt seen until tonight. A young man stood and said he always believed Ramadan was for the pious, but now he realized it was also for the broken. After the event, Nuseba, who had traveled from a nearby city, approached Ayan shyly. She thanked him for the space and said that hearing other people speak their truths helped her heal a part of herself that felt alone. They sat outside for a while, sipping tea and talking under the stars. And for the first time in a long time, Ayan felt what companionship rooted in faith could truly mean. Over the next few weeks, Ayan's life took on new shape. He balanced his job with weekend volunteering and weekly blog entries. He met new people through his writing and began to feel a quiet sense of purpose emerging. It was not dramatic, it was not grand, but it was real and rooted. His relationship with his sister deepened too. They now spoke weekly, not just out of duty but with love. They had begun making plans to visit their father's grave together, something they had avoided for too long. When they finally went, the air was still, and the sun gentle as they stood beside the headstone, reading Surah Yasin together and letting go of unspoken grief. His sister turned to him and said softly, "Ramadan brought him back to us, in a way I never thought possible." Ayan nodded, holding back tears, knowing she was right. Their healing had begun not in the loud moments, but in the quiet, steady days of fasting and prayer. Ryan also started mentoring a few younger boys from the masjid, including the child he once helped with a notebook. He would take them for walks, teach them simple du'as, talk to them about patience and faith, not as something unreachable, but as something lived. One of the boys wrote him a note saying, "I want to be like you when I grow up." A kind Muslim who listens. That note he kept folded in his wallet as a reminder of what impact looked like. One evening as Ayan sat with Baba Karim, watching the sunset, he asked him, "How do you know if what you're doing is enough?" The old man chuckled and said, "You never know for sure. That's why we keep doing it, not for results, but for sincerity. It's not about being enough. It's about giving what you can with the heart you have." Ayan let those words sink in. They felt like the answer to the questions he had never been able to ask out loud. The fear of slipping, the guilt of not doing enough, the pressure of trying to hold on to the Ramadan feeling. All of it softened in that one sentence. And so Ayan continued, not as someone who had mastered faith, but as someone who had been touched by its beauty and now sought to carry it forward in the way he lived, served, forgave, and loved. He learned that blessings did not always shout. Sometimes they whispered and hid in small, consistent acts. A glass of water offered to a stranger, a silent prayer for a coworker, a smile to someone forgotten. These became his acts of worship long after the dates were gone and the Eid sweets were finished. Ayan was no longer just fasting during a month. He was living a life shaped by the lessons Ramadan had quietly etched into his soul. The cold winds of early winter swept through the city, carrying the scent of smoke and old leaves as Ayan walked home after Isha prayer. The streets were quieter now, the lights dimmer, and the world seemed slower with the season changing. Just a few months ago he had walked these same streets filled with the spirit of Ramadan, with the sounds of Adhan echoing through open windows and hearts rising with hope. Tonight the air felt still, yet inside Ayan a new fire was burning, one that Ramadan had lit and life had failed to extinguish. He placed his bag down gently and removed his shoes before entering the house. His mother sat in the corner, knitting with slow hands, her breathing shallow but calm. Ayan kissed her forehead and sat beside her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes glistened as she looked at him and said softly, "You are the peace of this home now." Ayan smiled, not with pride, but with gratitude, because he finally understood what it meant to become a source of calm for others. The blog Hidden Mercy had grown beyond what he expected. It now had over 1,000 readers, some from distant countries, who sent him stories of their own struggles and moments of faith. Some sent pictures of their suhoor meals, some shared childhood memories of fasting in refugee camps. Others simply wrote, "I am trying too," and that alone made every post worth writing. One evening he received an email from a father whose teenage son had been struggling with depression during Ramadan. He wrote, "I read your entry aloud to him about fighting with faith when the heart feels heavy. He cried after listening, then he asked me if we could pray Fajr together the next day. You helped me get my son back." Ayan closed his laptop and placed his forehead on the prayer mat, letting tears fall silently, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming awareness that even in his weakness, Ali had made him a means for healing for someone else. That was a blessing no job, no wealth could ever match. Life outside the blog continued with new challenges. His job as a shift lead was demanding, but he learned to navigate it with patience and fairness. Sometimes he would catch a worker stealing minutes of rest or sneaking food before break times. But instead of punishing them harshly, he would sit with them and talk not just about rules, but about dignity. He remembered how Baba Karim once told him, "Discipline without compassion is a cage. Faith without gentleness is a burden that wisdom shaped." The way Ayan led people, whether at work, at the masjid, or in his own home, and as the months passed he noticed something. His body still tired at the end of long days, but his soul no longer felt starved. His faith was not a flame that burned only in Ramadan. It had become a steady lantern lighting every step he took during the final days of the Islamic year. The masjid announced a community iftar, for the upcoming new year, to honor those who had passed and to pray for the year ahead. Ayan volunteered to organize it. With help from friends, he arranged food decor, guest speakers, and even a section for children to learn about the beauty of fasting and prayer in simple ways. The event was beautiful, not because everything was perfect, but because hearts gathered with sincerity. From elders sharing stories of fasting through famine to teenagers reciting Quran for the first time in public, the night became a tapestry of faith woven by hands from all walks of life. And Usoba also attended, sitting quietly near the front, listening intently as Ayan shared a reflection on what it meant to carry Ramadan in our veins, not just our calendars. He spoke about the difference between performing Ramadan and embodying it, between ticking spiritual boxes and actually transforming through the struggle. He ended his speech by saying Ramadan does not come to visit, it comes to build. If you let it lay bricks in your soul, then long after the crescent moon fades, the house it built remains. After the gathering, Nusova came forward and handed him a folded piece of paper. Before leaving quietly, he opened it later at home. It said, "I found Allah in the hunger I feared and peace in the silence I used to run from. Thank you for showing me I wasn't alone." Ian placed the note beside the others he had collected over time. They were not trophies, they were reminders that the hidden blessings of Ramadan were not just for those who fasted perfectly or prayed all night, but for anyone who showed up, who tried, who cried, who fell and stood again. One night, just before the new year began, Ayan visited the graveyard with his sister carrying a lantern and flowers. They stood beside their father's grave, reading Quran as wind swept over the tombstones. Ayan whispered a prayer, not just for his father, but for himself, for all those who were trying to hold on to faith in a world that often made it hard. His sister turned to him and said, "Do you think we'll ever be the kind of people we dreamed of becoming?" Ayan looked at her and replied, "I think we already are, just not in the way we expected." As they walked home under a sky full of stars, Ayan felt something deep in his chest, a calm that came not from absence of hardship, but from the presence of purpose. That was the real gift of Ramadan, the strength to return to life and still be kind, still be sincere, still be hopeful, even when the spiritual high had faded. A few days later, Baba Karim passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news came quietly, without drama, yet its impact was heavy. Ayan attended the funeral, helping carry the body, washing the limbs, placing the white cloth with trembling hands. He remembered the nights they had spoken under starlight, the cups of tea, the stories of his mother's whispered duas, and the wisdom shared in a voice now silent. But even in his grief, Ayan felt no despair. Baba had lived a life that proved the truth of Ramadan, that closeness to Allah was not reserved for the loud moments, but lived quietly in the daily acts of care, discipline, humility, and worship. After the burial, Ayan wrote one final post for the year, titled, "The Lantern That Never Went Out." In it, he spoke of Baba Karim, of the lessons that kept teaching, even after the teacher was gone. He ended the post with the words, "I walked into Ramadan looking for ease. I came out with endurance. I fasted with fear, but finished with faith. I broke bread with strangers and built family. I cried alone and found companionship. I lost my teacher and kept his teachings. I searched for blessings and found them hidden in the very struggle I once tried to avoid. Now, every suhoor, every prayer, every quiet act of kindness reminds me Ramadan is not a moment. It is a movement." That night, as he stood in prayer, Ayan raised his hands and whispered, "Ya Allah, let this heart remain soft, even when the world turns hard. Let this faith stay warm, even when days grow cold. Let the blessings of Ramadan never leave me, no matter what season comes." And in the silence that followed, he felt it. The answer not in words, but in stillness. A gentle reminder that the light of Ramadan does not end with the moon. It lives on in the hearts of those who choose to carry it. The end.